Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Joseph Jones. I'm the Senior Vice President for Government Relations and Public Policy here at Greater Des Moines Partnership, and I'd like to thank you all for being here, and welcome to our conference center for those of you who've not been into our newly renovated space. This morning, we're going to talk about the Department of Labor's overtime rule, and I know this is really important to many of you, and several of our members have reached out to us to talk about this, and it's been something on the radar for several employers throughout, and I know that there's been several meetings that have discussed that as well. So thank you for attending this one. We are live streaming. This is our very first partnerships conference center, so please bear with us if we have any difficulties like this. Would you like to move over? Is that better? Okay, I'll go to this side. So thank you for being here for that. This is also going to be recorded, so if you miss anything, for those of you who are watching live, if there's something that breaks up, you can hopefully go back and watch it later. That information will be available on the web. Otherwise, once we have heard our presentations, we will take questions from the audience. The people in the room, if you could wait for Andrea to come around with a microphone so you can ask your question through the mic so everyone who is watching on the web can actually hear the question, that would be really helpful. And then, of course, if you guys maybe redirect the question or at least enunciate the question for the audience, that'd be helpful as well as we get through the technology of what we're doing. So this morning, we're going to hear from the Department of Labor, specifically from the Des Moines District, and we're going to hear from BrownWinick, one of our attorney firms here in town. Randy Luth in the center will be presenting first, and he's the District Director for the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division here in Des Moines. He's worked for the Department of Labor for nearly 30 years, spent much of that time in Cedar Rapids, and is back here in Des Moines, which is his hometown. Randy earned a master's degree in public admin from Iowa State and a bachelor's degree in communications and business administration from Central College in Pella. And to Randy's right is Melissa Wright, and she's a community outreach and resource planning specialist at the Des Moines District for Office for the Department of Labor. So she is the core for that. She's responsible for the community outreach and strategic enforcement planning in the district. She was an investigator for 5 years, as Randy was also an investigator in his previous time. And she graduated from Drake, where she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees. And last but not least is Ann Holden Kendall, and she's a member of the BrownWinick law firm, where she is the co-chair of their employment law practice group. Ann's primary practice focuses on employment law and on commercial litigation. She counsels employers in a range of HR issues, human resources policies and procedures, and a very lengthy list of all the things that she advises her clients on, everything from discrimination to the discharging of employees. She's a member of the Polk County and the Iowa State Bar, and she's the past president or former president of the Polk County Women's Attorneys Board. She received her BS degree in history from Iowa State and her JD from Drake Law School here in Des Moines. So I'm going to turn it over for Randy to open up. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Again, my name is Randy Luth. I'm the District Director with the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division here, right here in Des Moines. To tell you a little bit about the Wage and Hour Division, and again, we don't have a lot of time this morning to cover the topic at hand, so I'll be really brief with my comments here. But we're relatively a small part of the U.S. Department of Labor. There are 5 regional offices that are located across the United States, and we report to the Chicago, or we call it the Midwest region. The Des Moines District Office actually covers the states of both Iowa and Nebraska. We have an area office located in Omaha, and we have a number of field offices that are scattered across the states of Iowa and Nebraska. I actually perform most of my time in Cedar Rapids at the field office there, so I don't know if I have a lot of people over in Cedar Rapids have had an opportunity to visit with me over the years, not so much here in Des Moines. Our agency enforces a number of different federal regulations, primarily the Fair Labor Standards Act, federal minimum wage, overtime, child labor, record keeping, and that's basically what we're here to talk about today. March of 2014, President Obama signed a presidential memorandum directing the Department of Labor to update regulations defining which white-collar workers are protected by the FLSA's minimum wage and overtime standards. Specifically, the department was instructed to look at ways to modernize and simplify the regulations while ensuring that the FLSA's intended overtime protections were fully implemented. In July of 2015, the department issued its notice of proposed rulemaking, which received over 270,000 comments, and the final rule was published May 23rd of 2016 with an effective date of December 1st of 2016. So that's coming up quite rapidly here. This has been something ongoing, and it's upon us here. So this is a really timely, a great opportunity for us to go ahead and proceed with the discussion. Our focus is really on this final rules update. In the Fair Labor Standards Act, and again, the Fair Labor Standards Act was written way back in 1938. It's part of our New Deal legislation that took place during that period of time. There's a number of exemptions and exceptions that are written within the Fair Labor Standards Act itself, and it's really interesting if you ever wanted to study the history of the Fair Labor Standards Act, how it came to be. And it's like everything else, every other piece of legislation that's ever been written, you can look at the history of the exemptions, and there's automobile dealership exemptions, there's ag exemptions, that type of thing, and it's I won't say any more because Melissa here will kick me if I get off topic too much. So what we really want to do here is take a look at our next slide. We'll talk about the exemptions. A quick review of the exemptions that we are dealing with here. It's under CFR 541, Code of Federal Title 29, Part 541. Executive, Administrative, Professional Employees, EAP is what we kind of call them. Without going into a lot of detail, in order for an employee to be exempt, they have to be paid on a salary basis. They have to be paid at a certain salary level, and they have to have certain job duties. You just can't merely give somebody a title and pay them a salary and claim they're exempt, because it doesn't really work that way. For example, let's talk about the duties test. For executives, you have to be in charge of a department or a sub-department of a company. You have to have the authority to hire and fire, or at least have significant say-so and such. You have to supervise at least 2 or more full-time employees, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different duties tests that are involved with this. Coming attraction, just a secret, the duties tests have not changed. And the definition of what a salary is really has not changed. The salary levels are where the adjustments have been made with this new regulation. We could go on and talk about the different duties and things of that nature, but that's a whole nother presentation in and by itself, so we really don't have time to do that this morning. So if we look at the PowerPoint, salary level increase, that's where the change is. The additional inclusion of non-discretionary bonuses for the base salary. And one of the big changes is an automatic update component to the regulation itself. Or indexing is what some of us could possibly call that. So right now, the base salary for an individual that's going to be considered exempt if they're paid on a salary basis, because there's also an opportunity to be paid on a fee basis, but most employees are going to be paid on a salary basis. $455 per week. Effective December 1st of 2016, that goes up to $913 per week. One of the things, if you look at the calendar going in advance, I think December 1st, for whatever reasons, it sounds like a great, wonderful date, but December 1st falls in the middle of a week. which is, I find that to be quite interesting. I'm sure that a prorated version of the salary would probably be what the Department of Labor would accept. So what we have is $913 per week. How they got to $913 per week is based upon 40th percentile or 40 percentile of weekly earnings of full-time salaried workers in the lowest wage census region, which is set up by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Not my department. I don't know exactly how they do that, but apparently there are regions that they look at, they set it up, and they looked at the 40th percentile. So it's a relatively lower figure, lower number in order to get to that. With the new overtime rule, we do have the standard salary of $913. Now, that base salary can be anywhere from $913 down to $822, which is 90% of $913. The employer does have an opportunity to use non-discretionary bonuses or or incentive payments or some kind of a commission, if you will, to make up the difference. That's relatively new for this level of salary. So basically, as a PowerPoint indicates, that non-discretionary bonus can be used up to 10% of the salary. Now, we all know the difference between non-discretionary and discretionary bonus. A non-discretionary is something that you tell the employee in advance, if you do this for me, you'll get this money. Here's the carrot. You know, meet certain types of criteria for me, and you'll get this bonus. And the employer can take credit for that. But they can't have a base salary any less than $822 per week. At the end of a quarter, and that quarter will be defined by the employer, any 3-month period of time, the employer can sit back and look at how that employee's been paid to see if there's any shortages, if you will. And the employer will have an opportunity to go back and make up the difference in the very next pay period. So that's based, the thing to remember is every quarter will stand by itself. So every quarter, and this is a little bit confusing if you're not comfortable with this, but it doesn't take that much to really understand that every quarter you'll have the opportunity to go back and look at this and say, oh gee whiz, this employee here didn't make enough in commission or didn't make enough in bonus to bring them up to the minimum salary for that quarter. I have that opportunity to make up the difference. And that's called the catch-up payment. And again, it's important to understand that each quarter stands by itself. So if somebody has a really good quarter earlier in the year and does great guns, you can't take that, shall we say, overage and apply it to a quarter in which they didn't do all that well. Now, we also have, and in our current regulations, we do have what's called a highly compensated employee, and this is an individual that right now is defined as an individual that makes a salary of $100,000 per year. Right now, that particular employee, that test has been increased. I believe it's we have to go back we go back to one of the earlier slides, it's $134,000 per year will be a change starting December 1st of 2016. Now that being said, the base salary still has to be $913 per week. It can't be any less than that for somebody who's a highly compensated employee. So when you think about that, if you take $913 per week and multiply that by 52 weeks per year, we're talking about a salary of just over $47,000 per year. So that gives a lot of latitude for that employee to make those non-discretionary types of payments to the employee for them to earn additional bonuses and commissions throughout the course of the entirety of the year. And again, there's an opportunity for the employer to have a catch-up payment at the end of the year to make up the difference if that needs to be done. If the employer doesn't take an opportunity to do the catch-up payments, whether it be for the individual on the base salary or the highly compensated employee at the end of the year, and that employee doesn't make the minimums, that employer loses the exemption. And they could be faced with quite an overtime liability if the employee worked in excess of 40 hours per week because they no longer are exempt from overtime. This concept of automatic updates when it comes to the Fair Labor Standards Act is something that's been talked about in our agency for a good period of time, but it's never really been implemented until now. And what really happens is starting every 3 years and beginning January 1st of 2020, every 3 years after that, there will be an adjustment period in which these salaries will be adjusted. Updates will be published on our website 150 days prior to the effective date. This is, shall we call it an indexing, if you will? This is a really big change because, usually in order for something like this to happen in the past, there'd have to be some kind of, shall we say, act of Congress. But this is written into the law, so there will be something that employers will have to be aware of, this concept of indexing. And again, we use this data that's put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in order for us to get the salary amounts. The standard salary test, again, is the 40th percentile of weekly earnings of full-time salaried employees in the lowest wage census region. They use an average of all employees across the United States when it comes to the highly compensated employee amount. So it's the 90th percentile of, basically it's an average, the way I understand it. And again, that will be adjusted every 3 years as well. One of the important things that we really want to communicate here today is that besides what I just talked about with the changes in the salary amounts and the inclusion of the non-discretionary bonuses and the makeups and catch-ups and things like nothing else has changed. If you're familiar at all with the concept of what the definition of what a salary is and what the duties tests are for the executive, administrative, professional employees, none of that has changed. We still run, and as an employer, you'll want to be aware of what those tests are because you're going to want to test each and every employee. One of the things that I've heard is that some employers have really not paid a lot of attention to the tests that have been on the books for a long period of time, but now that the salary tests salary amounts are going up and the changes are being made, all of a sudden they're starting to become very interested in what is exempt and what is not exempt, and maybe they haven't really spent the time that they needed to really review what the tests are and what they need to do to make a determination as to whether or not the employees that they supervise are either exempt or not exempt. One last comment here. I probably am way over my time, but one last comment I would like to make is change is never something that is comfortable, but it's inevitable. Our particular office here in Des Moines, we're going through change right now. We're hiring new staff. Some people that we have held near and dear to our heart as retired, and changes in the regulations that we enforce. There's always things that are changing, and Melissa can attest for the fact that it's not a comfortable situation sometimes, but we all have to find a way to understand that it's inevitable, and we all have to understand and deal with it. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to have this discussion and talk about how the changes might affect you. So one last slide up here, and this is quite important. We do have I think when I started, we didn't even have computers. Now we have a wonderful internet site that you can download all sorts of information, copies of our field operation handbook materials, fact sheets, guidance documents. We can be reached by phone. So there's a lot of avenues for HR people, for employers to contact us and contact attorneys and things of that nature. But to really have it's really our goal to have employers have an understanding what these regulations are to the best of our ability, and really hope for employers do and are in compliance. So that's really all I have for the start off this morning. So
sounds good. See if I can control the clicker. That's what I call the remote at home. My kids laugh. So once upon a time, it did click. Let's see. Did it go? Oh, he's setting it up. So anyway, I never am sad when the government is telling us what they think. So I am glad to have you tell us as much as you're willing to share, and appreciate that a lot. And I will echo Randy's sentiment that my experience with the Department of Labor and with the EEOC, a lot of the folks really are focused on compliance. It's not just this big game of gotcha. And so I do appreciate that in my work, that's been largely the reaction that I've had in working with these government investigators. And like Randy said, these government websites have amazing resources on them. And we oftentimes are encouraging clients to look at that. Perhaps that maybe cuts into our billable hours, but we're okay with that because we'd rather have our clients know what they're, have a little better educated, questions, et cetera. So we're good with that. However, sometimes folks don't have time to do that. And so we're also glad to do whatever it is we need to do to help them along. So what do we do with these new rules? Here's the to-do list. Right now, I think you want to make a list of all exempt employees who make under $47,476, because that right there is your target range of folks. You want to take the opportunity to reevaluate whether they are actually performing exempt work duties. And that's kind of, referencing Randy's point that a lot of times employers had not been as focused on the duties test, and that has not changed. But perhaps, this is something that sort of slid under the radar a little bit when we're busy running a business, that, this is maybe something that doesn't fit. Or once upon a time, the position fit the exemption, but jobs are organic and they change over time. Sometimes we also have situations where perhaps the person in that position is not as proficient at it as we thought. I actually had litigation where there were these employees that were in this grouping that traditionally would have been exempt, but they weren't very good at their jobs. And so what happened was the employer was taking back more and more of those responsibilities because they weren't very good at their jobs. And you know what happened? They spoiled the exemption. So, this is a good time to look at that. So, even though it might have fit the exemption at the beginning, through time, through changes in the organization, through maybe lacking performance with certain employees, it may not fit the exemption anymore. So this is a really good time to step back and take a look at that. And as Randy said, you can see there's fact sheets and all sorts of great information on the Department of Labor's website that can be helpful in, acquainting yourself with what we need to be looking for. So what do we do? If the work does not fit into any of these traditional white-collar exemptions that Randy was referring to, consider some lesser-known exemptions. There may be some other alternatives that might still work for the position. I don't ever like to give up until I've explored every avenue, and I would encourage you to do that too, because obviously if there's something that still works, that can make some sense for your organization, because making a shift like this can be a big change, and it could, there will definitely be a financial impact on employers. So like I said, look for some other possibilities for other exemptions that might still work. But again, we want to make sure that they really do fit. So if the employee is not performing exempt work, we've looked at these lesser known exemptions, it's just, we're not going to be able to make it fit. Then they need to be reclassified. And to do that, we do recommend that you contact your legal counsel to work through that, because that can be kind of a complicated situation. As Randy had pointed out, and I would also encourage whoever is running your payroll, I kind of think of it as silos. So, when we're talking about hours in a week, that work week stands alone. So if someone works extra in one work week, and less in the next, you can't roll that from one to the next. We've got to make sure we pay that overtime, for that pay period. And then we're talking about, kind of these catch-up payments, and how Randy mentioned that quarter has to stand alone. You can't use sort of an overage, from one to make up for another. So it's important that, your payroll folks start to really think of this. I guess I kind of call it sort of silos of, individuality on certain aspects of pay, and looking back at the time period to see if the person, made enough during that quarter, if there needs to be a catch-up payment. So having your payroll folks really understand that is going to be important. C, if they are performing exempt work, then you just need to address the money issue. And there is a change. And as Randy, mentioned, there are some options there, but obviously that is something that you'll need to be, taking a look at. So, our to-do list with regard to the money. Let's decide how to address the shortfall between what exempt employees make now and this $47,476. And the Department of Labor says, in response to the new overtime rule, you can, and you may or may not be able to see that on the screen, but hopefully in the materials, you can just pay time and a half for the hours over 40, the overtime hours in a work week. That's obviously an option. That might be, depending on how your workflow is, that may or may not be workable for your organization. B, raise the workers' salaries above the new threshold. And recall, Randy had mentioned that there is that 10% that can be made up with the non-discretionary bonuses or commissions. But again, we just have to make sure that we're, keeping track of that, and that, that's being paid appropriately. And then C, and I do think that some employers may elect this option, is to limit the employee's hours to 40 hours a week. And then D, of course, you can have some combination of the above. Now, with regard to option A and just paying that overtime for hours over 40 in a work week for our reclassified employees who are now hourly, we need to make sure that we're prepared for that change, because this isn't just, okay, well, now we got it, they're hourly, whatever. That's going to be kind of a different world for a lot of those employees. So I think you want to, there's a bit of a message issue too, because I have recommended reclassification in the past, that employees feel like it's a demotion. And that is something you will have to manage. Now, I do think there's been quite a bit of publicity about these changes, and so I think they will understand that this is just a legal compliance issue. But the human heart is something else, and you will have to manage that. So that is just a realistic issue. But beyond that, it really is going to change how they function. Because they will have to record their time. So are we going to have a time clock? Do we already have a time clock? Are they using timesheets? There are some web-based, programs that you can use. There are some applications. In fact, the Department of Labor used to have an application that you could keep track of time. Is that right? A mobile app. See, there you go. But the key is then making sure that they are realizing also what is their time worked. And that can be one of the tricky things. And so we kind of have outlined a fact sheet there that can be helpful. And then in our second bullet point, this is the one that can be the real sticking point, which is work that wasn't necessarily requested by us as employer, but was suffered or permitted. which means that the employee did work for us without us directing them specifically to do that work. It's still work time. It also might be something that we weren't aware that they were doing. That doesn't necessarily, in fact, this usually means that they're being a good and diligent employee. It's not a bad thing, but the key is we need to make sure that that is captured. So the example under that last bullet point, employee may voluntarily continue to work at the end of a shift to finish an assigned task or to correct errors. The reason is immaterial, whether it was their screw up, whether it's them being diligent, whether there's a deadline, it doesn't matter that work was being done. Those hours are work time and are compensable. Now, one other little point I will say, a lot of employers have a policy where they want employees to get pre-approval for overtime work. And that is okay if we are not wanting employees to just take it upon themselves to work all these extra hours. But and you can discipline an employee for violating that policy, like you can discipline an employee for violating any other of your work policies, but you absolutely must still pay that overtime. In fact, how we have seen that unfold when there have been policies where we're trying to keep tabs on overtime hours and how hours are recorded. We've had clients, audits are more and more prevalent, I would say. I mean, I think there's been a real focus on it from the Department of Labor. And so we've seen more and more audits. One of the things that we've seen is when we have those policies and we have not implemented any discipline for violation of those policies, it kind of makes the Department of Labor think, well, is it really a policy that you're trying to, manage this? Or is this just something to protect yourself? And there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, go ahead and keep working. I mean, and so that's why it seems counterintuitive to discipline someone who is being diligent. And I'm not saying you need to bring down, the heat on them terribly, but you do need to remind them that is a violation of our policy, and you need to make sure that, you've asked. More so, I see that with regard to someone who is not recording their hours appropriately, because what we don't want is it to look like there is a culture of this wink, wink, nudge, nudge, go ahead and do the work, don't report it. That's more, I think, of an issue when we've got a policy about accurately reporting work hours, and that is violated, even, accidentally. We do need to make sure that the employee understands that that is an expectation, that is our policy, and they do need to follow it. Otherwise, there could be more serious consequences. Because if we don't do that, then it could feed into this perception that our culture, is kind of this, we've got what it says in our handbook, but we really do want you to be working off the clock. So just, think about some of those things. Rest and meal periods. Now, if you've got a short duration, usually 20 minutes or less, those are going to be paid for as working time. That's just the way that is. Now, if you do want to have a bona fide meal period, that needs to be 30 minutes or more. And that employee needs to be completely relieved of duty. We don't want, like, for example, at a law firm, secretaries sitting at their desk eating their salad while they're working, or even just checking email. I mean, we do not want that at all. And I tend to err on the very cautious side. I really don't even want them sitting at their workstation, because someone may walk by and not realize that they're on their meal break and ask them to do something, or their phone rings or something like that. And now we have, broken into that, and that's work time that's not being recorded. So I really encourage employers, they need to be absolutely relieved of duty away from their workstation for safest, that's best practice, to make sure that they are not, that it's not going to be work time. Now, we've got a special issue with smartphones. It's just wonderful to be connected until it's not. And again, this is one of those issues where the diligent employee, God bless them, that's wonderful, but it also can cause some real problems when trying to figure out what, recording those work hours and the time that they work. And we've got some information there that, professionals, managers, and executives who carry smartphones for work report interacting with work a whopping 13.5 hours every workday. And that's 72 hours per week, including weekend work. So that very quickly can add up. And maybe what the employee is doing is just checking an email quick. But they have done that for work. They've touched base for work. Now, there is a de minimis exception, but I think that's a scary one to rely upon. Am I right in that fear?
Yeah. The things that Anna bringing up here are not new concepts
No.
under what the definition of hours worked are. But what is new is taking the regulations that discuss what hours worked are and applying it to individuals that at one time perhaps have been thought of to be exempt, that are no longer going to be exempt. And these are types of individuals that probably are more likely to carry smartphones, to perhaps have do some work from their home office on occasion, to be at the soccer game, and to be out with a mobile device. I mean, everybody's got them now. My kids have them. I mean, we all, even I have one. I go home at night and I say, hello, dear. My wife's on the sofa. And she doesn't even say hi to me. She's on her phone.
She'll text you hello.
Well, I will tell you this. It's a really good opportunity. Like if, like I'm in my bedroom and I don't want to let the dog out, so I can text my kid, let the dog out. Boom. No, but the fact of the matter is, this is something that you have to be aware that this is considered work time. Now, will the Department of Labor get really upset if somebody's out and they check an email once in a blue moon at the soccer game? Probably not. We're not going to be aware of it. Nobody's going to really care about that. That takes seconds probably.
Right.
But on a regular and repeated basis where somebody is taking work home or is doing, my wife does this all the time. I won't tell you where she works, but she's always on the computer at night and she's doing this and doing that. She's on the phone, that type of thing. It's work time. It really truly is. And it needs to be a part of her, it needs to be recorded and paid for. The way she is exempt as of now.
Okay. And we had a situation with a client where they were a production facility and they had continuous operations, 24-hour operations. And so as the next shift would be getting ready to come in, they would check email on their smartphones or remotely from, home to see sort of where production had ended up on the last shift, because, each shift would do kind of a little mini production report. And then the next shift would review that before they came in. And they might review it, an hour or two before that. I think that there's an argument then they started their day with that email. And that's called the continuous workday rule. So these are some of the things that you're really going to want to be cognizant of. What is off the clock work, and making sure that you collect that. So say you've got an employee who is going to be treated as an hourly employee now. They need to make sure that if they are, more than, if they are personally, I would say if they check an email and respond or engage with it at all, I think my cautionary advice would be then they should email, the payroll department to say spent, 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes reviewing email. Because the other issue is it might be one email and then an hour later it's another email and then it's you know what I mean? It a lot of times isn't confined to that small piece. So that's something to be cognizant of, because we don't want what's called off the clock time. It all needs to be on the clock. How you record that, you need to figure out how that best works for your organization. It can be them reporting it via email. Sometimes I've even encouraged to have some, auditing of, because I think to some extent, especially if the device is owned by the company, or you can tell from login records if people are logging in, after hours. And so I'll recommend to the employer, you can set your policies and say, don't work after hours, et cetera. But I think you want to try and check that every now and then to see that they really aren't doing that. Or if they are, that they are accurately recording it. Now that's my it feels a little bit big brotherly, but I think it's that important for the employer to make sure that they show that they're making good faith efforts to enforce, their policies, because it is the employer's obligation to accurately record the work time. You also want to make sure that your managers are not encouraging off the clock time. Sometimes I have found there is a bit of a gap between higher level management and sort of the on-site managers. And it's not that anyone is wrong or bad or anything, they just have two different roles. And the on-site managers are trying to get a job done, they've got pressures, they've got deadlines, et cetera. And sometimes I think their focus becomes more on that than on some compliance issues. Making sure, so you may have the higher level management folks that are aware of this, we've set our policies, we feel like we're trying to do this right, and then there's a disconnect with the on-site managers as to how they're implementing it and tracking and that sort of thing. Or maybe even kind of the messages that they're sending, to the employees, because that we do not want that to happen, because what may be revealed is that we thought we were doing it right, but then we've got one manager that was kind of like, oh, you can finish that, can't you? And they're doing that to somebody every week, because then that starts to, again, affect, culturally how it looks like we are complying or whether we care about compliance and things like that. A lot of times there is a bit of a snafu. I think what is more problematic is when the Department of Labor looks and sees that it looks like it's more systematic and we don't care about compliance. Then that's really, that's problematic. If there's a problem, we can fix it, we can move on, but you want to make sure that, you really are taking the steps to make sure that your folks and your on-site folks, and then your employees know, we really mean it. We want to pay you for the hours you've worked, make sure that you record them. And I've started implementing into policies, if any, kind of like harassment and discrimination policies, if anyone encourages you to not report work hours, complain. And that's something that the DOL has liked to see in policies, because it shows that we mean it. This isn't a wink, wink, nudge, nudge situation. So those are some things to think about too. And again, like this, like Randy and I've been saying, this isn't necessarily new, but it is going to have more importance, because you are probably going to have more hourly folks than you had previously. So must I pay them hourly? No, you can make them salaried non-exempt, but you have to still pay the overtime for hours worked more than 40 in a work week. And so there's an example there. And so the issue is you still are going to have to record that time. You're still going to have to make sure that, any hours over 40 worked in a work week are paid at that overtime rate. If it makes sense for you to kind of have that be, salary for the 40 hours, okay, but make sure that you've got your mechanisms in place to have, the payment for those overtime hours for that work week. And then, as we've been discussing, this change comes December 1. You want to be taking steps well in advance, planning, preparation, and then, as we discussed a little bit before, some messaging. We want them to understand this isn't that we don't value them as much as we did before, that this isn't a reflection on them, that this is just, this is something that we have to do in compliance with the law. And then we do want them to know how it affects them. And that's, really a large focus of that is going to be on tracking and reporting time, because that will be very different for them. If they do need to request approval ahead of time to work overtime hours, make sure that they know who they're supposed to talk to about that. We need to explain any policies we have with regard to flex time. However, I actually kind of get nervous when I hear the word flex time, because we want to make sure that that is contained within our work week. Remember how I talked about the silos? So if someone front ends, their work week because there's a big project or something like that, and they're at, they hit their 40 hours by Thursday, and they're normally scheduled to work on Friday. if we are going to keep them at that 40-hour basis and we want to have a flex time policy where they can then have that day off, we need to make sure the employees understand how that works. We also need to make sure that our payroll people understand that's a silo. It can't go from one week to the next, because I've seen that it less now, but 10 years ago, I saw that a lot more, where employers were rolling this from one work week to the next, and that's a problem. So we want to make sure that we don't do that. And then if there's any impact on benefits like PTO accrual and things like that, we want to just explain how this is going to work, so that they're not confused and that they know what they're supposed to do. So again, must I pay them hourly? Well, let's see. You could also, did I get off one? Oh, we've got a duplicate slide. Did I? Yeah, here we go. Option B. You can raise their salaries, and then, or you can add this non-discretionary bonus, like Randy was talking about. There's that lowest amount that would still have to be paid weekly, and then the non-discretionary bonus that would, at least have to be paid quarterly, if not more frequently. You could set up a situation like that. You could raise. You could raise the salaries and then, like I said, do that 10% as the non-discretionary bonus. But again, that's only up to 10% of that. And remember too, like Randy mentioned, the indexing, that's going to keep increasing over time. What was the last time the salary was raised? It's been a while, hasn't it? Okay, I was thinking it was more than 10 years ago, so 2004. The third option is to limit the hours to 40 in a work week. We talked a little bit about that, but this example also shows you might want to build in some flexibility there, because there may be situations where something will come up and it may go over that 40 hours. So you may want to limit their work week to, more of a 35-hour week or something to allow for that cushion. Now, that's obviously, there's going to be some possible pragmatic and practical issues there. The employee is not probably going to like that their hours are less. So I realize that that's an issue that will be something that you need to consider. You could, hire someone else to make up for the hours, kind of start dividing out the work week a little bit more, but then obviously you are having more employees. And like I said, the one who used to have more hours may not like that change. But it is an option, and that is one thing to consider. As I mentioned, the record keeping, that's important. Employers have to do that. Here's the list of all things that, the types of information that need to be kept for each non-exempt worker. We've also got the link to the Department of Labor's website on that. And now, questions.
Senator or congressman has voted on this, or will they ever? So I'm curious as to whether or not any business interests were brought into the decision-making process of this, because the perception from my businesses that I represent is this was done completely in an echo chamber, and raising the qualified levels to the levels you did passes on a lot of cost to employers, and so they're very angry about that. And so I'm wondering whether there are business interests out there that were brought into the discussion for purposes of making this for your deliberations, and making this decision. Because I've yet to find one that thinks this was a good move. They'll adjust to it, of course. But I guess the second part of my question is, how do we reassure businesses that the next thing you come up with is going to cost them another thousands and thousands of dollars for no additional production whatsoever? Thank you.
Sorry. I don't know. Okay. Yes. Thank you for the question, and I'm not necessarily sure if I have the full knowledge on how to particularly answer that question, except I can tell you that there was a period of time that the public was allowed to comment, and a lot of comments did come in and they were reviewed. I wasn't there, I wasn't part of that process, but I do know that our agency did have that opportunity to review and consider the comments that did come in. And that being said, it is one of those changes that do take place. The last time there was a change was 2004. Before that, I remember when I was hired back in 1987, I went to one of our internal conferences, and the joke of the day was, boy, those changes to the CFR 541 are on their way, meaning that it hadn't been changed in quite some time. So it's something that's there. It's something that's employers do need to account for, and I do understand that there will be an adjustment period. Melissa, do you have any?
Yes, as Randy already said, I mean, there were 270,000 comments that were taken in. Originally, the amount was much higher, and it was lowered dramatically from what the proposal was and the initial proposal for the final rule. So I think that obviously there were a lot of consideration toward employers and what the cost to them would be, and that's the reason why it did get lowered so much. There are certainly a lot of consideration on our part when we were looking at it, because we do look at employers. We do have a very good relationship with employers. We don't, like Ann had mentioned, we don't do the gotcha games. So we are always looking at compliance and trying to help employers to come into compliance. And that's just par for the course with, it's we're not some agencies where it's we're looking to penalize you. We are looking to help you. So we trust employers really to be the business owners that they are, to be the entrepreneurs that they are, and to accept the challenge and just say, okay, this will be an adjustment period, but we've adjusted to a lot of things. They've adjusted to the FMLA, they've adjusted to other changes within the regulations. So we just trust that they'll be able to accept that challenge and come into compliance.
Wants to contact the Department of Labor to kind of have, some specific questions vetted and things like that. Is that, something that that they can do? I mean, obviously there's a lot of resources online, but if they've got, kind of some questions, I mean, obviously you're not going to give legal advice necessarily, but
the number at the back of the presentation, I'm not sure if you guys got a copy of the presentation, but the final number, at the end of this, where it says the toll-free information and helpline is 1-866-4-US-WAGE, and that is basically a toll-free line where you can call and it will connect you to your local wage and hour office, and that person will answer any questions that you have, and they'll help you to understand anything that you're not clear on. They're not going to give you, a way to set it up or whatever, but they may be able to give you suggestions as to how to come into compliance and to help you any way they can. But they definitely would be able to answer your questions.
Good morning. My name is Chriselle, and I work with Come and Go as part of their HR team. Thank you for the information and the conversation. My question is around, do you see this as being much more forward-looking as opposed to looking back? And what I mean by that is you gave the example of job descriptions that have evolved over time, and this gives us a really good reason to hit the restart and reset button and make adjustments accordingly. So just curious as to, do you think this will conjure up, things that we need to be focused on, look back, or is this really going to be, with these new regulations, much more of a reset and look forward?
what do you think I mean, I have some thoughts, but I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things Ann brought up, and I wrote this down because I remember, going out as an investigator, oftentimes one of the things I would ask for from an employer would be a copy of their job descriptions, especially for the individuals that they were claiming to be exempt. And either two things would happen. Either one, the employer would say, now look, Randy, we're in the process of revising these. Well, almost every employer is always in the process of revising them because the fact of the matter is a lot of times the job description said that the employee was performing A, B, and C, but when we interviewed that particular employee, they were doing something completely different. So we, as investigators, had to make that determination as to the employer is letting us know and leading us to believe that the employees are operating in this particular world when in fact the employees are telling us something different. Now, of course, the employer would say, well, you didn't ask the right questions. But we do our due diligence the best we can as an investigative office and to try to make that determination that we're being fair and equitable with those types of questions. But the fact is, I think this is a great opportunity to look at where you're at, not only with the individuals that you have been claiming the exemption on, but going forward, especially with the changes of the salary test. So I think you bring up a really good point that this is, I believe it's a great opportunity, especially going forward, shall we say.
And so I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so with regard to these changes, starting, December 1, that's going to be a mark in time with regard to these specific issues. And if an employer is not in compliance, then obviously that's going to be the date on the calendar at which the Department of Labor is looking at it. If perhaps someone maybe didn't fit neatly in an exemption prior to that time, I do think that is still it's a vulnerability. It's I can't say that that might not be looked at. I do know the Department of Labor is pretty busy, but there's no guarantees, I guess would be the answer on that. In past experience, I had an employer, for example, that there was a lot of assistant managers that really were not doing exempt work anymore, and the employer realized it on their own and decided to change that and pay them hourly. The problem is they kind of screwed up the equation a little bit. And so even though they were paying for the overtime hours, they had kind of messed up how they were doing the math. And so they were really trying to be in compliance, and there was an audit. And what was nice about it is the Department of Labor recognized that they actually were trying to comply. And so while there was a smaller amount where there was some overtime that was still owed, the department did not go back and punish them prior to the change where they weren't really in compliance, and then looked at the date at which they tried to, change and be in compliance and didn't assess any fines or anything like that because they realized that the employer was trying to do it right and just kind of messed it up. So that's one example where, I thought the department was being, very reasonable, but obviously, you never know. I mean, situations can change and there's no guarantees on, how things will be enforced, et cetera. But I do think, I think you want to make sure you make these changes or start looking at these things as soon as possible, because if there is an issue with how things stand currently, maybe even making some changes early would help limit that vulnerability to some extent. But I think, you'll have to balance that from, your business perspectives and all the pressures that you've got running the business. Oh.
We would not take these new regulations and try to apply them backwards.
We are at time, and so just in the consideration of your time and everyone who attended and those online, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Melissa, for your time and expertise on this issue. We will have as many resources as we can possibly find, and we'll get those posted. We'll share those with you and those who have signed up to join us today. I don't know if they're willing to stick around for just a little bit, just to answer any questions from those of you who are here and want to talk a little bit one-on-one with them. Thank you again for coming, and we'll have a great day. Thanks.